Okay.
Welcome to Nonduality Vancouver. I'm Kevin Diacu, and we are fortunate enough to have caught Rick Archer between flights as he heads out of Vancouver from, I believe, a retreat with Rick Huff on Vancouver Island,
With
and probably,
Lauren Huff
sorry, Lauren Huff,
and
and
and Lucia, his wife.
yeah, and a host of interviews, I guess, as well. Eh?
I did four.
Wow. So, how was your stay here? How was the retreat with Lauren?
It was marvelous. I really enjoyed the interviews I did, and Lauren is a gem and a kind of a little known gem, and he actually wants it to stay that way, but he's getting better known. He decided not to let me interview him at this time because he's trying to keep it low key. I interviewed a couple people on the retreat who were or have been students of his for quite some time and who are quite remarkable in my opinion. And so we talked about it a lot. So I think the word is going to get out there. But as it is, his retreats are booked months in advance, and he keeps them small, and he only charges what it costs to the actual expenses of the place. And if he makes any profit at all, it's only because people voluntarily donate over and above those expenses. So, and he's a remarkable teacher, but I don't want to go on too long because you might have other questions for me.
So by way of introduction, in case anybody has just sort of parachuted onto this planet and doesn't know who Rick Archer is, you started Buddha at the Gas Pump in fall of 2009.
Right.
And as of this morning, I took a look at it, and you've got 305 interviews with awakened souls on there. Quite a massive undertaking. Now, the beginnings of this, and I want to, there are essentially three tracks that we could probably take on this. One is your experience with others, and the other two are sort of your experiences. And you started by way of transcendental meditation, correct?
Right. Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? What the genesis of that was?
Yeah. When I was about 17, it sort of dawned on me that there was such a thing as enlightenment, and I kind of had this aha moment where I realized, oh yeah, that's why we're here on this planet. Um, never occurred to me before. So then I took drugs for a year, and by the end of that year, I had dropped out of high school, gotten arrested a couple times, and was kind of messed up. And I sort of reached the end of that rope, and decided I better do something to turn my life around. And there's details I will tell you, but for the sake of time, I ended up learning TM, and it was a real godsend. It really benefited me profoundly and immediately. I began to practice it regularly. After a couple of years, I became a teacher and taught it for 25 years. I'm no longer actually in the TM movement, but I haven't missed a meditation of one sort or another since I learned, which means at least twice a day.
And so, um, how did you come up with this idea that you wanted to start interviewing folks?
Yeah. Well, I live in a town where of about 10,000 people, where about 3,000 of them meditate and have been meditating for decades, most of them. And I had a lot of friends, have a lot of friends who had undergone spiritual awakenings, quite significant and abiding ones. And I was meeting with them in a small little satsang thing, and people would say, I told my friend, or I told so and so, and they told me I was crazy, and that you couldn't be enlightened or awakened or anything like that. Can you levitate, or it had some realistic expectations about what it should be, and didn't, and there's. And so I thought, okay, well, there's this one set of people who are having awakenings, and there's another set of people, the majority, who haven't had one yet, and many of them have gotten kind of discouraged about the possibility of ever having one. And when someone tells them they've had one, they don't believe them. So I kind of would like to connect these groups together and start interviewing these awakened people, and let their friends, and let them tell their story in some detail, so that their friends can see that it's actually really happening, and then that might make a difference in those people's lives. And also make it easier for the awakened people, so they wouldn't have to be in the closet. So I conceived of it as a little radio show that I was going to do on this local radio station in my town that has a radius of about 10 miles. And I kind of if you look back on the chronological index of interviews, you can see the very first pilot interview I did there with George and Mary Foster. And I thought it was just going to be a radio show, but then the radio station didn't want to do it. They just didn't think it would be a fit for some reason. So for several months, I kind of bugged them, and then finally kind of got it through my thick skull to put it out on the internet and make it a bigger thing. So the show actually didn't start becoming publicly accessible until 2010 in the winter sometime, maybe February, and I had to learn a bunch of stuff like how to. Well, first I was doing interviews in person, and then after a bit I wanted to start interviewing people elsewhere, so I figured out how to record them on Skype and how to set up a blog and this, that, and the other thing. So anyway, that was the genesis of it.
Now, as I said at the outset, I mean, it would be hard to describe this anything but a massive undertaking. I'm just wondering if there's any time during all of this where you sat back and went, "What the heck have I started here?" Like, seriously.
No, because I totally love it. I mean, my life would be boring without this. Having taught meditation for 25 years and then just sort of phased out of that and just basically focusing on earning a living and paying off a mortgage and stuff like that, I really felt like, and I hope this announcement in the background isn't interfering too much with people being able to hear me, but I've just always been a kind of a spiritual zealot, and have always had a desire to help others, and so when this kind of thing fell into place, it was a real fulfillment of a tendency that I have, and it kind of fit well with my natural abilities and so on. So it's really been a joy, and I can't wait for the day that I totally drop my day job and do nothing but this.
Probably not far away, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Now, you talk to a lot of people about their direct experiences. I never hear you talk about yours. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've been kind of thinking about that because I just was on this retreat this weekend, and everybody was talking about my awakening and this and that. And I think there are many people on that retreat who are awakened, but I think the word awakening itself is a little bit ambiguous. I mean, who knows what everybody else means by it? It's not like as clearly shared in our common understanding as a word like tree, or apple, or something. Yeah. But my experience, if I had to describe it in a sentence, would be: I'm everywhere, I'm nowhere, and I'm here. I kind of thought of it as a way of explaining it. There's a sense of vastness and non-limitation and unboundedness, and a sense of not even existing as a person, and a sense of being a person. Sure, I mean, there's all these people running around saying you're not a person, I'm not a person. Jab them with an ice pick and see how they react. Tell them they're an idiot and see if there's any kind of emotional reaction. There's still some semblance of a person there that is necessary for living life. So in addition to that, I would say that there's whereas for years and years I was kind of desperately seeking something, there's no longer a sense of that, but by no means is the journey over. It's kind of morphed into more of an exploration and an adventure rather than a quest for something that I don't yet have. And yet, in my angle of viewing things, there's a vast range of potential spiritual unfoldment, and one awakening does not mean the job is over. It's usually just the beginning.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that, because even during your interviews, you get a sense that you're not coming from a place that this turkey is cooked at all. I mean, no. Completely. There's still work yet to be done.
I don't think I've ever met anyone yet, and I've met some pretty famous gurus and people like that whom I would say could not evolve even further. I would just, it might seem presumptuous, but I would even say that of Ramana Maharshi or Papaji or all the rest. The range of possibilities is vast, and there's always the possibility for greater refinement and unfoldment of certain capacities and so on. I mean, it's not like the absolute's going to change. Consciousness is going to change any. It is what it is. But our ability to reflect that, to express it, if you will, has no end to it. To its refinement, to furtherance.
And you do hear a bit of this, and I get hearing some of your interviews with others that there's a bit of pushback to this sort of whole neo-Advaita aspect, that there is no me, so there's nothing to be done.
Yeah.
It almost seems counterintuitive.
Yeah, and a lot of people who say things like that would sort of acknowledge Ramana Maharshi as an authority. And I wish I had the verse in front of me, or the quote, but there's a quote where he says, the percentage of people for whom that would be a relevant instruction is minuscule. And the vast majority of people have something they should do, So I think the people who say what you just said are hung up in an intellectual concept of the nature of things. And as Francis Bennett put it, if you use the notion that there's no one home and nothing to do and all that stuff, and if you hope to actually become genuinely realized with an orientation like that, it's kind of like playing the lottery as a retirement plan. You might win, good luck, but chances are you won't.
Yeah. I like that you brought up Francis, because he seems to be, one of the prominent people who sort of addresses this openly, like, guys, listen. And I think, and one of my favorite interviews that you did is, I probably shouldn't give this away because I was going to ask you what year it was, but one of my favorite interviews that you did was with both Francis and Ajay at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think Ajay described the sort of the settling as I think he called it a divine duality during your interview, and I really like the sound of that. There's sort of a groundedness to it, yet a real sort of essence of awareness to that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to put that interview together for a couple of years, and I was kind of like having a hard time getting through Ajay's handlers, and then finally I interviewed Mukti, his wife, and at the end, after we had finished the interview, I said, I've been really wanting to get together Ajay with this guy Francis Bennett. I think they'd really like each other. It would be a real interesting interview. And I'm coming out to California in a few months, and maybe we can get together and do this. So she talked to Ajay, and Ajay watched my interview with Francis and really liked him, and so said, sure, I'd love to meet him. So we went up there to his house about last year when I was out for the SAND conference, and did this interview. And not only was the interview nice, but Ajay and Francis have become best friends. They talk to each other a couple hours a week on the phone, and they get together wherever, if they happen to be in London or someplace at the same time.
Yeah.
They just become best buds.
Yeah.
So that really gives me a lot of joy, because I love to connect people with people who will enrich them. So, which is one of my joys with BatGap in general, and people are always saying, oh, I'm so grateful because I met my teacher. And it really gratifies me to be able to sort of plug people into, situations or other connections with others that are going to facilitate their own growth and evolution.
Yeah, it's interesting you said, because even during that interview, you could see that relationship between Ajay and Francis sparking up as the interview sort of proceeded, and it was really neat to watch.
We were going to do another one this year, and we had it planned and everything, but then Ajay had some retreat he has to do out in Lake Tahoe at that time when we're going out to Sand. Yeah. But we'll do more. Hopefully, one way or another, make it an annual event.
So do you have a favorite interview? I don't want to diminish all of the rest, but is there one that really stands out as, holy smoke, that was awesome?
Yeah, my particular opinion of which are my favorites is actually probably no more legitimate than that of anybody else who watches them. It's just my subjective opinion, and it kind of tends to be people with whom I have become good friends afterwards. And you can, it's not like Ajay and I hang out or anything, but I really do enjoy talking to him. I think he's awesome. And Frances has become one of my best friends, and so I really enjoyed him. Kristen Kirk has become a very good friend. I enjoyed my interview with her. Igor Kufayev was enjoyable. There are a whole bunch, and I don't mean to offend or insult anybody by leaving them out. There are 300. I can't possibly include them. And it's almost like, and they retreat into the rearview mirror pretty quickly, because I'm always preparing for the next one, and so I forget what I've actually discussed with this, that, or the other person. But there have been a great many. If I look down the list I've had in front of me, Muji was a delight, and also the people who aren't very well known, who I've really enjoyed speaking with. There were a couple that I did on the retreat this weekend that I'll be releasing in the next week or two that are going to knock people's socks off. particularly I think Claire Blanchflower. You know
Mm.
Claire, right?
Heard of it. Yeah.
She's up there in
Yeah.
Salt Spring Island or something, and we did 2 hours, and then 2 days later she came to me and she said, I've been having some thoughts in the shower and whatnot about our interview, and there's some things I feel I need to clarify and add. So then we sat down and did another hour. So it's going to be like a 3 hour thing when
Oh,
we splice
wow.
it together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
mean,
in terms of numbers, there's a favorite interviews page under past interviews on BatGap where it's just the total number of views on YouTube.
yeah,
But that's just mainly because some of those people are really popular, like Bashar and Anita Murjani and people like that.
yeah.
So
But
again, I just want to apologize to anybody I've left out because I can't name all the names, but there's a great many.
yeah, and I asked that kind of knowing
Total
it's an
joy.
unfair question
Yeah.
because it's you're bound to leave somebody out. So
Yeah, we'd spend the next hour listing a whole bunch of things.
Now, when you talk about a massive, I don't think
Pardon?
people really understand what an incredible undertaking this is. I mean, the preparation you do ahead of time for these interviews. There's books that are read, hours worth of interviews on video, plus the interviews themselves and the editing and all that stuff. And I know you have help with that, but 305 since the fall of 2009. It's beyond my scope. I've sat down and edited these things, and it takes me like a day just manipulating all the video and getting it to where I want it before publishing.
Yeah,
Huge.
we don't do a heck of a lot of editing. I try to do them in such a way that not much editing will be needed.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my best friends in high school is a guy named Ralph Preston, and I haven't seen him since 1972, but he's done all the video post-production on all of these. And then there's a guy up in Edmonton named Larry who does all the audio post-production. Then there's a guy in Utah that arranges the shipping of equipment from one guest to the next and sets them up and tests with them beforehand. And then there's a guy in Spain who coordinates a team of transcribers and translators. And so there's a volunteers page. You can see some of the other people involved, but there's a whole team of people doing different things like that.
Yeah.
And as far as if you were to watch me live my life, I'm just a regular guy living in Iowa, and I get up in the morning and usually put my earbuds in and start listening to something interesting and grab my toothbrush and start my day. And over the course of a week, just riding my bike and cutting the grass, washing the dishes, and doing this and that, I can easily listen to an hour a day of stuff. So I listen to people I'm going to be interviewing, and then in the evenings I sit and read their book if they have a book, and that's my preparation. Mm-hmm. And I don't actually write down too much in terms of questions or anything. I just feel like I get to know the person through listening and reading. And then once I've gotten to know them a bit, it's like there's more of a flow when I actually interview them, and so appropriate questions just come to mind.
Well, that's one of the reasons I was attracted to interviewing you, because your interview style is similar to mine, and I've been doing this sort of professionally for about 20 years. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the style is this, and I've got no prepared notes or questions or whatever. It's a hot air balloon. We're going to take it off the ground, and I have no idea where it's going to land, but I'm sure that we'll land safely in some respect.
There's something I saw that you posted on Facebook the other day, and I meant to read it again before the interview. It was something about the divine versus the non-dual or something like that. You know what I'm talking about? You asked people's opinion of it.
Oh, I think I asked them their opinion of God.
Uh-huh.
Like what their interpretation of God was, whether that was a theistic. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it might have been. And we could talk about that a little bit if you like.
Sure.
It kind of excites me.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm giving a talk at the SAND conference. And,
okay.
And I've been working on it all year just as a creative outlet, and I've got about 40 minutes. I'm going to pack a lot into it. But one of the main points is that if we think about what even science has told us about the universe and the world and everything, mm-hmm. It's mind-boggling. It's totally awe-inspiring. Like if you take your fingertip and just kind of consider one of the cells, which of course you can't see, right. It contains about 100 trillion atoms, and each of those is a perfectly orchestrated little thing in perfect coordination with all the other atoms. And and in terms of it's just on the biological level, it's about as complex as Tokyo, mm-hmm. And that is perfectly orchestrated with incredible intelligence doing all sorts of things. The DNA contained in the nucleus of that cell is about 6 feet long in each little cell. And since there's about 100 trillion cells in our body, there's, I don't know, billions in our finger. And the whole thing is just this massively intelligent mechanism which could not possibly, I think it was the astronomer Fred Hoyle said, the chances of intelligent life arising randomly are about as likely as the chances of, um, a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 747 from the contents therein.
Mm-hmm.
So if you actually think about what's going on, every single little cubic centimeter of wherever you look is just packed with intelligence. It's being orchestrated. There's a dance going on there that is kind of awe-inspiring in its complexity and its perfection and its coherence. And take it out to some little cubic centimeter in interstellar or intergalactic space. Even there, I mean, you have various gravitational fields and electromagnetic fluctuations and things whizzing through there. Even there, so no matter where you can conceive in the entire known universe, is there a vacuum or a gap or a place devoid of intelligence? And that's just from what science tells us.
Right.
And and from what spirituality tells us, we are that intelligence. In our essential nature, we're not. Sometimes consciousness has this plain vanilla connotation. It just seems like consciousness and there's nothing going on there.
Right.
It's actually the home of all the laws of nature, the home of all the devas or the impulses of intelligence that govern the whole creation. They all reside there, and we are that. So they reside within us. And so, in terms of God, that's my concept of God, and it's something which is entirely experienceable and livable. One can be that reality and live one's life in that way.
So what we are is is the intelligence that's created all of this?
Yeah, we are the divine, and that's all that is. It may seem that I'm talking to you, but if we take non-duality seriously, then there's really only one thing, and it's talking to itself. And
Yes.
so there's just that one thing, pure intelligence or pure consciousness interacting with itself, and through that interaction giving rise to the appearance of forms and phenomena. And there's a whole sequential process through which those appearances arise, which is kind of discussed both in ancient spiritual texts and also by modern physics. And John Hagelin, whom I interviewed, put those two together and kind of drew the correlations between the ancient Vedic wisdom and the modern physics understanding in a brilliant paper that he wrote.
So let me throw a curveball at you then. So
Mm-hmm.
if this divine intelligence is that which links all of us, and not links all of us, is all of us.
Is all of us.
So how then do it's an old argument. How then do things like Syria happen and all of these atrocities around the world? If this divine intelligence is so wonderful and magical and creative, how then does that happen?
My understanding of it, my explanation for it would be that if you're going to have a relative creation, you're going to have pairs of opposites. At least that's the way it seems to be. And so you have hot, you have cold, you have fast, you have slow, you have big, you have small, and there's just all these pairs of opposites. There's this sort of a thing in the Vedic literature about the gods and the demons having this tug of war with this divine serpent as the rope and Mount Meru as the thing that the rope kind of wraps around it, pulling back and forth. And it's sort of meant to represent the, in some kind of metaphorical or mythological way, the process of manifestation. And somebody once asked my former teacher, Maharshi Yogi, why in the in these Vedic scriptures are the gods and the demons always depicted as doing battle with one another? And he said, if they didn't do that, the whole creation would dissolve. So there's this sort of creative tension or something between positive and negative forces and relative polarities that kind of keeps a structure alive. And if we didn't have those tugs, those pulls, those diametrically opposed things, which are really only the same thing interacting with itself, but without that, then the whole thing would collapse.
These measures, of course, are only our own conceptualizations of what's occurring, hot and cold, right and wrong, true and false.
Yeah,
They're just what we've labeled them as, right? Or
sure, but they represent realities. I mean, hot represents, molecules that are vibrating more rapidly than cold. You know,
right.
and so they're concepts, but they refer to phenomena, and so and so I mean, this is just an explanation, but people say, well, like you said, what about Syria? What about Auschwitz? What about all these horrible things? And
Yeah.
many people have come to the conclusion that there couldn't be a God, because why would a God allow such a thing? Um, but if we think of God as the totality, not just some kind father who's always going to, coddle us and take care of us, and everything's going to be sweet and rosy. I mean, there are probably planets that get obliterated every few seconds by exploding nova, and there's all kinds of death and destruction that happens all over, and it's just part. Death isn't the opposite of life; it's the opposite of birth, and so there are natural cycles, and it's probably it may seem horrible from a limited perspective, but if we could zoom out far enough and see it from God's perspective, all is well and wisely put.
Yeah, it's interesting, similar to what I think it was Alexander Pope wrote, I think in his essay on man, when he said, "Whatever is right." And this is
Yeah,
what back in the medieval times when all of these discussions were happening as well.
sounds like Byron Katie.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
Boiled down into a few words, but
yeah. There's a theologian named R.C. Sproul, and he said, if there's even one random molecule in the universe, there is no God.
beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, when we talk about Syria and we talk about Auschwitz and all of these things, and what I hear you kind of saying is that these are the genesis or impetus for much greater understandings. I mean, would we really be would so much love be welling up in the world if it hadn't been triggered by this? And
Yeah, it's true. I mean, these days certain current events take place, and they seem to be catalysts for social change. I mean, maybe that's always been true, but it has. You can look back to, for instance, that movie Selma, where the cops were beating the shit out of all those people trying to cross that bridge, and then the whole nation woke up and thought, we can't allow this to continue, and so it really got the civil rights movement going a lot better. And even recently with that guy in Ferguson, Missouri getting shot, it kind of breathed life into the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And
Cecil the lion,
yeah,
600 lions
Cecil the
killed
lion.
annually for sport, and this one lion woke the
Yeah,
world up.
it's like he sort of gave his life for greater public awareness of the situation.
Yeah.
So it seems to be happening that way. I forget what I was going to say, but go ahead, ask another question.
I don't have any, but we're just going with it.
Yeah.
So um, one thing I did want to ask you is a bit of a segue or departure
Oh,
from
I
what
know what
you're.
I was going to say. Let me just throw this in.
Yeah.
I watched. You may be aware of Michael Newton, who wrote these books about people that the phase between lives that
Yeah.
people go through, and he hypnotized 7,000 people to go back into the period between their lifetimes. And I watched a documentary about that recently, and this lady had relived her. She had been in Auschwitz, and
Yeah.
and she kind of was reliving all the memories very vividly of being walked into the showers, and she said she took deep breaths because she wanted it to be over with quickly, and
Yeah.
and, and so on, and so they were asked, Michael or whoever was hypnotizing was asking her, why did you choose such a lifetime? Because the premise was that we do choose our lifetimes, and she said it was a mutual agreement, and actually the much tougher choice was made by the people who were running those camps.
Yeah.
That was the tough assignment,
Yeah.
but somehow both parties, both sides of the equation, had evolutionary lessons, as tough as they may have been, to learn through going through those experiences.
Yeah. Um, in in your understanding through the interviews and stuff like that, through all of the folks you've talked to, I mean, it appears that this sort of the awakening process, and I apologize for the continued hot air balloon analogies here, but it seems that there's sort of this initially a kind of an ascendance, sort of this break away from all earthly things. It's just sort of there's this unglued nature to it where it's just this unbelievable experience, and then there has to be kind of a settling or a retethering to
Yeah.
earthly, this earthly kind of human existence.
Yeah.
Um,
I think I'm going to walk over to a little bit more quiet place here. We can keep talking as I do
yeah,
so. But yeah, I mean, that seems to be the pattern that many people report, that they're kind of up and out and then they're down and in. And, you know, initially there's this sort of plunge into the transcendence, and it's extremely, gratifying and self-sufficient, and the world seems to be far away, and you know, one may become disinterested in it, and so on. It may seem illusory, but that's just one swing of the pendulum, and eventually, sooner or later, I mean, you can get stuck for years in that phase, saying
yeah,
there's no person, nothing to do, and the world is unreal and all that stuff. But eventually, it seems people are coming back to the kind of realization that there's also this, and this has to be if this is to be really meaningful, it has to be a living reality.
yeah.
Uh, you know, um, there's a Stephen Wright joke that said I broke up with my girlfriend because I wasn't really into meditation and she really wasn't into being alive. Um,
I love that guy. That's a great line.
And actually, speaking of Adya and Francis, there's a nice YouTube video if you search for Adya Shanti and Francis Bennett, where um, the two of them have this talk. It was in Berkeley or someplace, where they're basically talking about this subject. And Adya was saying that he kind of, some years ago, was trying to talk about this kind of thing, about getting more integrated and so on, but that people didn't want to hear it. And these days, the whole spiritual community is kind of coming around to it.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that seem to occur during that where sometimes, and you talk about these people that are caught in it for years, where there seems to be uh, a self-identification with this whole untetheredness. That
Yeah,
there's this, that becomes the new identity, which can't be
yeah,
very beneficial for the whole integration. Then when there's this settling, a lot of times you'll find people that are go, well, I had it, but it's gone now. It's
yeah.
sort of this mistaken, idea that this retethering is the loss of awareness.
Yeah. Um, this isn't directly related to what you just said, but but it is related to the point we're discussing, which is that if if all of this isn't included in one's realization,
Mm.
if one is sort of off in some transcendental, aloof state, and the world is seen as separate or illusory or anything like that, then it's not non-duality.
Yeah.
It's actually a bigger duality in a sense. And non-duality really means Brahman consciousness, and Brahman is inclusive of absolute and relative together, and is more than the sum of its parts. It's a greater wholeness, and there is a progression of states of consciousness that many people go through, which is that initially, with realization of the self, one does feel separate from the world, but then over time it begins to be seen that the world is myself also.
Yes.
What was it that Shankara said? Sometimes attributed to Ramana Maharshi that the world is illusory, Brahman alone is real. The world is Brahman,
Yeah.
um, and and it kind of harkens even back to what we were talking about God. I mean, all of this it's one solid reality, and consciousness is its most it's really just consciousness, and then excitations of consciousness.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
all that we see as the relative creation is consciousness in various stages of interaction with itself, causing, excitations and, perceived process of observation, relationships, and so on. Anyway, I gotta be careful not to ramble too much.
Yeah, I mean it's great because it's totally in orbit with what we were just talking about, and you talk about that it's inclusive of everything and exclusive of nothing.
Yeah.
Goes right back to the point where, I asked you this question, well, what about this? Well, what about Siri? What about, well, yes, it's inclusive of all of that too, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's,
Uh-huh.
it excludes nothing. All of these things that we perceive to be things that might be wrong are just part of that as well.
Yeah, which is not to say that there isn't right and wrong, good and bad, and
Yeah.
those are just relative polarities like anything else. So sure, it's wrong to, clear cut the rainforest or to, cause 150 to 200 species to go extinct every day as we're doing. At least from, it's, at least from, it's wrong at least if we want to continue to live on a planet that's habitable.
Yeah.
Um, I suppose from the ultimate perspective, it's not wrong. It's just, we're just sort of God doing that to ourselves through, in one phase of our functioning in the divine play and the vast cosmic scope of things. Um, at some point, the sun will expand and become a red giant, and the Earth will become a molten blob. And I imagine it won't be too pretty as that begins to progress. Not too nice to live here, and there'll be all sorts of suffering, and the whole thing will just fizzle out. But is that wrong? No, it's natural.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, you said something that kind of keyed me to an idea that this sort of we have these it almost seems as though that consciousness is sort of the police of all of this. I mean, even if there's spots of wrong, the world will rise up, in a collective and go, hey, you know what, this Syrian thing is wrong, Auschwitz was wrong, and however these things bubble up, cutting of the rainforest is wrong.
Yeah.
There seems to be this greater collective, this consciousness that goes, hey, hang on a second here, we know this not to be how we want to be doing things. Whether you want to call it right or wrong, we have a better approach, and it doesn't include those things.
Yeah, I'm just fishing through my notes for a quote here that I'm going to be putting in my talk at the SAND conference. But there's a verse from the Rig Veda which goes, Richo Akshare Parme Vyoman Yasmin Veda Adivishve Nishedu. And basically, it goes on, but it basically means that all the devas, or the laws of nature, reside within you, within consciousness. And it goes on to say that if you don't know that consciousness, then what can those laws do for you?
Mm-hmm.
And there are some interesting quotes that I came across. Like in the Gita, for instance, it says that the self is indeed the friend of something about one who knows the self, but for he who does not know the self, it behaves with enmity like a foe. And there was a thing from the Gospel of Thomas where Jesus said something about, oh God, I wish I could find my notes here. But same idea that if you know the reality, then it will support you, but if you don't know it, then it will destroy you. So if there are all these laws of nature that govern the creation and which ultimately are contained within our own consciousness, if we know our own consciousness fully, then we are in tune with those laws of nature, and we tend to act in such a way as to be of benefit to others and to ourselves. But if we're not in tune with that consciousness, then we conflict with or violate those laws of nature, and so we're constantly behaving in what in Sanskrit would be called adharmic ways which violate laws of nature and which have consequences that come back to us in terms of our own suffering and suffering of others.
But you say that destroys us. In what sense does that destroy us?
Well, just what I was saying. I mean, if okay, here we go. Oh well. Okay, here it is. Yeah, never mind. Can't find it. It destroys. I mean, look what people do. I mean, let's say, just take a simple example. A person smokes cigarettes.
Yes.
And they seem to enjoy it, and they do it, and they're violating certain laws of physiology by doing that. They're bringing poisons into their lungs, and it eventually causes a painful and protracted death. And but that's a simplistic example because in everything we think, say, and do, we're emitting waves of influence. And it's impossible to calculate the intricacies of those influences. There's a saying in the Gita that says that karma is unfathomable. Human intellect can't calculate the complexities of karma. Even like, throw a stone in the ocean and you're sending out an influence that radiates throughout the whole ocean. Raise your arms in the air and you're actually slowing down the earth a little bit, the way an ice skater does when she puts her arms out. So everything we're doing is emitting an influence, and we're only very, very, very partially aware of all the subtleties and the extent of that influence. But if we could establish our awareness in that field of intelligence, which is actually governing the universe, know ourselves to be that, then we will behave in perfect accord with it. And spontaneously, action will be life-supporting, and we won't unwittingly violate laws of nature and cause harmful influences.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Are you ever puzzled by the limitations of our own understanding of that? Like the limitations of the human mind to conceive these things?
I think it's natural. We're all sort of evolving, and we start out as who knows what, rocks or something, and then go through varying stages of evolution. There's a Sufi saying that God sleeps in the rock, dreams in the plant, stirs in the animal, and awakens in the human being. So it's all God, and God is evolving forms of greater and greater complexity through which I'll just use the word he, can know himself as a living reality, a breathing, speaking, living reality.
Right.
And so it's natural for there to be degrees of ignorance. It's just sort of the same scale as degrees of enlightenment.
Yeah. And sometimes the ignorance, even if especially if it's exceedingly painful, can drive us to the point where we become aware of that.
Very much so. I mean, my whole story about learning to meditate and all, life was really getting so unpleasant that when I finally learned, the contrast was tremendous, and I took off like a shot, in a completely opposite direction.
Yeah. It's interesting. All of this work you're doing, bringing stories of folks who their experiences of awareness. This hasn't put you in Beverly Hills driving a Lamborghini.
No.
So what is it from all of this that fuels Rick Archer? I mean, what?
Well, it's not the money.
Clearly.
Just as it wasn't the money when I was a TM teacher for 25 years. If it had been, then I guess I would have been an idiot for doing it.
Right.
But it's the gratification, and just that, I feel like I'm an instrument. I feel like I'm just sort of serving a larger purpose, kind of being guided by some intelligence greater than I can fully comprehend. Mm-hmm. And that feels good. It just feels right and feels good, and it's what kind of lights my fire.
Yeah. Well, and I'm afraid I have to apologize. In focusing on the work that you've done through BatGap, which is amazing. It's not all you're really known for here either. I mean, all the work that you're doing with sand, and in interviews like this, sharing your experiences and your wealth of knowledge, is, I think, gaining speed on what you've done in BatGap. And you still, I mean, that needs to be noted as well, as far as how you're acting in support of this.
Yeah, it's all kind of related, and hopefully I'll be able to take all the interviews and things I do at Sand and put them up on BatGap as well.
You're pouring your life into this.
Yeah. I'm just living my life, and I'm doing what I love. And initially my wife was like, "You're gonna do another one of your stupid interviews," and she wheeled dehumidifiers down the hall and stuff during the interviews, and then she kind of realized, how much I love it, how much good it's doing people. You get all these. There's a testimonials page on BatGap, which you can, under the About Us menu, and it's really cool stories of people whose lives have been changed or uplifted, or even in a few people saying, it's contemplating suicide, and now my life is so different. So, it's just really gratifying to do something like that. and of course it's just, there are all kinds of people in the world doing wonderful things, which are
Yeah,
gratifying. I mean, Doctors Without Borders, the guys who do that would probably be making more money if they just stayed in their local
right.
town and worked as a doctor. So there's all kinds of wonderful people doing things, and I'm just kind of playing my role.
Yeah. I'm glad you are. I mean, the level of support you're giving to folks that are just poking around and looking is amazing. There's got to well, I mean, the rewards for them are huge. Like you say, that there's the connections you're making with people. That's the real punch for you is hearing this. I would imagine
Yeah.
even out of every interview, and I think I've heard you say this in the Sand interview, after every interview that there's this opening for you as well, to sort of
Yeah, each one is uplifting and enlivening, and the whole process of preparing for it and doing it, it infuses me with more better understanding, and just a broadening of my perspective. And so the whole thing is, it's like an evolution. It's like a spiritual practice for me, really. Doing the whole thing, it's very conducive to my own growth.
yeah, that's awesome. Look, I know you have a plane to catch and a bite of lunch to catch. I have to get back to my real job as well, but I'm really grateful for you making the time for us today to chat and share some of your story.
Well, thanks. I really am glad to do it. I enjoy having conversations like this. It's fun being interviewed once in a while, not just being the interviewer.
Yeah,
Gives me a chance to talk more.
it's unfortunate. I mean, I think we could probably sit here and do this for like 8 hours. There's
Yeah.
so many avenues to pursue, but
You'd have to buy me a hotel room and a plane ticket.
well, we'll see how that works out. Rick, once again, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Okay, thanks, Kevin.